Okay, our next presenter is Julie Maddox. Mattox. Prairie restoration steward while operating her own surveying counseling firm. Julie had the opportunity to explore various ecosystems throughout the U.S. She and her husband relocated to Northeast Texas in 1996. 14 years later, she had the chance to purchase a dairy surrounding her original property, and the Prairie restoration began. With many challenges along the way, she is open to sharing her full experience and passion for restoring the tall grass prairie. She recently donated 4.5 acres and began the nonprofit, the Northern Texas Prairie Community Classroom. Julie currently resides in Mattox, Texas with her husband Jack and her dog Zoe in a little house on the prairie. At this time, Julie.
Well, what a good turnout today. Whoops, let's go right here. Well, I'm really excited to be here today to share my story with you. Can you hear that? Is that better? Little story about a restoration project that I'm doing right here or over there in Northeast Texas. And I can tell you one thing for sure. There is no easy or fast way to restore an old dairy back to a tall grass prairie. It'll teach you patience whether you like it or not. It's teaching me the art of observation. I wish I could control the weather, and it did not proceed in any manner that I thought it should. It did not go like I had planned. It's going to go the way that it wants to. But I can tell you one thing for sure, that even a restoration project of my size, it's not the biggest in the world, but it's not the smallest either. It has a profound effect on the wildlife and is making a difference in my community. Little historical background of where I live in Northeast Texas. I just live 40 miles south of the Ables, by the way. And this used to be, where we live, a native tallgrass prairie post-oak savanna system. It dominated over 24 million acres, and sadly, there's less than 1% of it that remains. And that's due for many different reasons. We've heard all of them. It's urbanization, it's the breaking up these large tracts into smaller tracts. It's farming practices, and in my area a lot, it has to do with introduced grasses. A little bit of history about myself. I was a really lucky young woman. I got to be a surveyor in the oil and gas industry, and I got to go all over the United States and Canada, and I worked in many different ecosystems on beautiful ranches that I know other people are never going to get to see. But I also, on many of the projects, I worked with archaeologists, paleontologists, biologists, and botanists. And it was working with those grassland specialists in the short and the mixed grass prairies of the West. And they began to teach me about that prairie ecosystem and all of its diversity. Am I losing that? Yeah. It was all the different grasses that were out there, the many different forbs, all the animals that were there, those insects that were out there. It soon became my favorite place to work. But for me, the prairie offers something that none of those other ecosystems that I worked in did. It has a sound. And it's the sound of those grasses rustling in the wind. It's all those birds that are singing out there. It's that symphony or orchestra of insects. I just find that absolutely incredible. Again, I couldn't get enough of the prairie. I forgot to pass that on there. But anyway, yeah, couldn't get enough of the prairie. Now, I moved to Northeast Texas in 1996. And I purchased a little home on 1.2 acres, and that became my little home sweet home, my sanctuary. I was gone for many months at a time, and it was nice to come back to a little place like that. It was surrounded by a beautiful little pasture of about 70 acres. There was introduced grasses there, but there were some remnants of natives out there. Lots of grassland birds. There was all kinds of wildlife out there, coyotes, I saw bobcats, rabbits, snakes. I like snakes. I enjoyed, especially after being on the road for a long period of time, coming home and sitting out in the backyard in the evening and listening or watching the bats fly over and maybe listening or watching the fireflies when they were there. But about 3 years after I moved there, the owner of that beautiful little pasture decided to reopen a dairy that was right next door to me that I thought was permanently closed, and began milking over 250 head of milk cows. You can see my little home sweet home there in the middle. I'm surrounded. Well, when one is gone for long periods of time, when you come home, you begin to notice dramatic changes. Grassland birds disappeared. Dominant bird at the bird feeder was a European starling and the English house sparrow. Snakes disappeared. Rabbits disappeared. But what didn't disappear was flies. That dairy farmer fed those cows really close to my fence line. And there you can see where the milk or the lane was. The cows went back 2 times a day there to get milked. The flies became so bad we could no longer sit outside in the summertime. I went as far as to spray for those flies. Not only did I do nothing to deter the flies, but I'm sure I killed every beneficial insect that was left on my property. I have a dilemma here. What am I going to do? Well, I could continue living there the way that I was, but I sure didn't like it. I had a fly focus. That's all I could think about. I could sell the place. Who's going to buy my place with all those cows sitting 30 feet from my back door? No one. Or I could buy out that dairy. And after 10 years of negotiating, I bought out that dairy. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my dairy and I love my cheese. But I never wanted to see another cow on my property again. Well, I made a few changes. I added some trees around the stock tanks that were there for some wildlife habitat. Had those dairy lagoons drained and added a pond. But other than that, I didn't do too many changes. I continued to cut and bale the hay because that's what we all do where I live. And but one day, on a walk around 2014, hot summer day, hay had been cut and baled. I stopped and I leaned up against one of those bales of hay, closed my eyes, and I listened. Not hearing too much. Certainly don't hear my symphony and orchestra of insects out here. Not really even hearing any birds. It's my aha moment. I have a monotypic stand of Bermuda grass. It provides very little habitat for anything other than my army worms, which I also sprayed for. But I had been reading about prairie restoration and felt very intimidated by all the literature that was out there. I didn't know how to go about it. I didn't have the equipment. So I contacted Texas Parks and Wildlife requesting technical guidance. And in the spring of 2015, my first 25 acres or so entered into the Pastures for Upland Birds program. It's great. For those of you who aren't in Texas, it's a great little program. It offers cost share incentives, technical guidance, the use of a no-till drill to plant native seeds into these pastures that have been dominated by some of the exotic grasses. And its main purpose is to create biodiversity, and that's to provide habitat for our resident, our breeding, our migrating, and our wintering bird populations. And under proper management, those same now native pastures and hayfields can provide nutritious livestock forage if one had cattle. Well, here's just a few of the grassland birds that this program is targeting. I'm sure all of you have heard about the billions of birds that we're losing in the last 20 or so years. Our eastern meadowlark has declined by about 95% actually, and that's why loss of habitat. And here's just a few of the other birds. Again, our grassland birds are in trouble. They're experiencing these long-term population declines. But if you notice right here, some of our wetland birds are doing pretty good. There's some great agencies out there, Ducks Unlimited and Nature Conservancy have helped restore a lot of the wetlands. But our grassland birds are continuing to suffer. Well, you guys, here's this great Bermuda hayfield out there, and Parks and Wildlife said I needed to apply the Roundup. Man, that's a tough sell. I mean, here's a beautiful hayfield, and I can sell the bales, and it was a real hard sell for me. But my biologist said, Julie, if you want to see it in your lifetime, that's something that you're going to have to do. And he says, by the way, you won't get 100% kill on that Bermuda anyway. It's still going to stick around. Well, I soon learned to love the look of dead Bermuda. We applied the Roundup in June of 2015, and the property sat idle the remainder of the year. And in January of 2016, Parks and Wildlife delivered the no-till drill, showed us how to use it, and we planted the seed. Just a few of the seed that's in our mix is we had little and big blue stem, Indian grass, some white tridents, switchgrass, eastern gamma grass, and quite a few forbs were added to the mix. And I bought another and spent a lot of money on this, another wildlife mix of mostly really pretty flowers. You know, I wanted this beautiful little prairie out there, and it did not do very well, and as we go on, I'll tell you why. But here we are, we're planting in our phase 1, again January 2016, and then I added another 40 acres to it. I was able to buy some more land from that dairy farmer. Well, here we are in April of 2016, and you know, I have this image that the only thing that's going to come up is what I planted. Boy, was I naive. Here we have all cool season stuff, and almost all of this is introduced. There was buttercups, henbit, shepherd's purse, all kinds of things coming up, but nothing that I planted. But by June, well, nothing that we planted, but by June of 2016, we started seeing a lot of the annual flowers that we had come up in forbs and stuff, sunflowers, not a lot of grasses that we were seeing yet. And guess what happened? The birds already returned. That very first year, we had eastern meadowlarks nesting. Why were they successful? Because we didn't cut and bale their nests. Then we had dickcissels. I'd never even heard of a dickcissel before, but they nest now at my place every year, lark sparrows. Well, I soon learned, I was really naive about this whole process. Maybe it's a really good idea to be naive when you go into this. But there's that thing called the seed bank, and when I eliminated that mat of Bermuda grass, everything that was out there wanted to grow. We had some great vetches coming up, legumes that we had not seeded for. They came back, they were in the seed bank. But what I was not prepared for was the amount of curly dock that we had. And dock's not a problem, but we had acres and nothing else was growing. Also on our phase 2, we had about 15 acres of solid pigweed come up. And that had all came up, I think, about August of the following year, and Parks and Wildlife said, Julie, just go ahead and shred it. So I did, but guess what? Came back better. So we ended up having to do a little herbicide treatment, and we had some rescue grass that was there. That has starts to grow in late winter, has a growth spurt in spring, gets real tall, lays over, makes a mat, just like the Bermuda, if you don't graze it. But it didn't get any better the second year. In fact, we're kind of going backwards right now. We didn't realize, and Parks and Wildlife didn't realize the amount of annual rye that we had out there, and the dock. We just had too much annual rye. I mean, look how tall it is. But I don't want to give you the idea that the whole thing was bad. We had some really good areas. I had some good areas where switchgrass was coming up. It took 3 years before we started seeing the eastern gamma. It took that long. And we have some really good stands of that right now. Indian grass was coming in good in a few areas. But again, and we had some forbs that we had planted. Changes every year, what kind of comes up, flowers. But hey, Parks and Wildlife's, they're on my speed dial right now. I'm calling my biologist almost every week saying it's not coming along the way I want it to. And he realized that we had a lot of annual rye out there, and he said, well, maybe we can do a prescribed burn after season 3, and he came out along with the burn specialist and said, no can do, you don't have enough fuel, you have too much annual rye. So all I was able to do, and it was fun walking around with my drip torch and making little isolated burns, and it did help. But again, look at that rye. It's just not getting any better, and I'm not seeing my natives or anything. The biologist came out and said, Julie, you need cows. Well, that's not what I wanted to hear. I don't know anything about cows. I don't even know what to ask. But I thought about it for a while. And before I ventured into that, I talked to the NRCS. And their guy came out. He threw his arms up in the air. Gosh, Julie, this is perfect. I wish my cows could be over here. He said, Julie, you're going to flash graze, mob graze, rotationally graze, whatever you want to call it, but you're going to get some polywire, make some electric fences around there, 1, 2, maybe 3 acres. Move 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 head of cows in there. Let them eat that one little pasture and move them to the next. Well, I thought about it, and I thought I could do that, so I went and bought the polywire and the reels and the energizers, and I started making my little pastures. And I borrowed 13 gentle cows. And guess what? They couldn't keep up with the ride. So I borrowed 13 more gentle cows. And fortunately for me, I was able to find some mentors. And that is so important to those of us that are just getting started at. And I found that with the Abels. Like I said, I didn't even know what to ask about cows, but they trained me. And I bought 13 gentle cows from them, mama cows. And you know what? It is easy. It takes me longer to walk back to the pasture than it does to move the cows. In fact, those girls will let you know when it's time to move. They stand by the fence. In fact, I have to hide from them quite often. If I think they need to stay another day or two longer, you got to duck. And also, the Abels taught me about trample planting. I do that in the winter, like with putting the seed out in the cubes and letting the cows come in. But I'm also doing that now all year around my minnow feeder. And I'll put some grass seed around there, let the cows come up to that. And then when I think they've trampled it in long enough, I'll move it around again. Well, this is what it looks like when you don't graze. And that's what it looked like the very first season. It was just absolutely incredible, the changes that happened. Well, the cows are only there to eat the annual rye. It's time for them to move on. But I called my biologist out so he could see what was going on, and his jaw dropped. He just could not believe the changes. And Parks and Wildlife really didn't want cattle long-term on the property at all, but I saw that he was in a really good mood, and I asked him, you think it'd be okay if I keep a few cows? And he said, Julie, absolutely, as long as you continue to rotationally graze. So again, it's time for the ladies to leave. Most of them left, but I got to keep a number of them, still have plenty of them. And I can't tell you the changes that we started to see once we started to rotationally graze. The native grasses are coming in better than ever. Areas that were doing okay are doing excellent. Areas that we had never seen anything before, those grasses are starting to come in. Remember I told you that wildflower mix that didn't do very well? Well, we started seeing, I know we planted those 3 years earlier, and we started to see those. Not a whole bunch of them, but some of them survived. And that's our Texas prairie dog, by the way. That's Zoe. Well, I've got the makings of a tall grass prairie now. I was pretty excited. And I called them my ladies of the prairie, and the cows were the missing link in my restoration project. And I can no longer imagine, especially in my circumstance, a restoration project without the use of cattle. I mean, those are happy cows out there. We can't bring back the buffalo, but we can use our cattle to graze in a similar fashion. Well, there's that word again, that biodiversity. That's so important, and that's what I'm trying to do with Texas Parks and Wildlife. Remember, I'm in the Pastures for Upland Birds program, not the Pastures for Cows program. But they all work together. But anyway, not only am I making habitat for the birds, they wanted me to make habitat for the reptiles, the amphibians, the small mammals, the bees, the buffaloes, all of the insects that are out there. And part of my qualifying management activities with Texas Parks and Wildlife is just some of this. I have to continue to rotationally graze. I do prescribed burns. All of my areas have not done great, so I'm actually doing some reseeding in areas. I do a lot of brush management. I make brush piles for the wildlife. We have some permanent water, and I spend a lot of time on controlling some of the exotic species that come up on the property. We supply some supplemental water in areas and shelter and food. We got a lot of bluebird houses now. And I mean, there's the monarch, they're the poster child for all of this. I used to have a no-fly zone. I mean, they didn't nobody stopped. Birds, insects, nothing. But now they fly in now. But there's that word again, grazing ecology. And I don't know about you guys, but I get vast amounts of pleasure from watching cows graze. I don't know what it is. It's kind of like watching fish in a fishbowl. But I really got interested in what they eat, when they eat it, what times of the year, especially when I make a pasture and open up. And what are they going to first? When I open up that pasture and they start grazing, guess what? It's not on grass. It's on different forbs that are out there. Cows are eating about 80% grass and about 20% forbs on my place. Well, I've got my own little research project started along with help from the NRCS. We're collecting the forage that the cows are eating at certain times of the year and sending that in for analysis to see just what are the cows eating and why do they like it so much. You know, I used to have a problem with curly dock. That's 38% protein in that. They love that stuff. Arrowleaf sida. I thought it was a weed. In fact, I told the NRCS, gosh, look at this stuff. I need to get the herbicide out here. He said, no, they eat it. And that's got like 16% protein in it. The partridge pea, I don't know what that is yet because when I started my project, that had already finished up. But August, September, they're eating the tips off of that. It's incredible. And our giant ragweed, everybody shreds that around where I live, but certain times of the year that has the same nutritional content as alfalfa. And what really got me excited, I can open the pasture and where these buffalo gourds are, I know they're all out in the west and everything, that's like crack to my cows. I mean, they're fighting each other to get to that stuff. The seeds in those gourds have 42% fat in the form of vegetable oil and up to about 35% crude protein in them. No wonder they're eating them. They strip every leaf off of my Maximilian sunflowers out there. They still bloom, but someday I'll be able to tell what the crude protein is in that. Western ragweed's really high also in protein. But I'm planning on, my little project is all times of the year to collect all this stuff and see what they're eating. The NRCS has been a huge, huge help to me. They assisted in a grazing plan. We're doing some soil testing in areas that are doing good and in areas that aren't doing so good. We do forage testing again. They helped me with a big plant inventory. And now I belong to the grazing group, which is just so much fun. We get to go to other people's ranches and farms and see what they're doing, trade ideas, maybe even sell each other cattle. It's a lot of fun. And they helped me with some really cool projects. When I first started this in 2019, I know my neighbors were laughing at me. I had this big aluminum stock water tank, and I'd roll that out to the cows and drag a hose up to a quarter of a mile away to fill it up with water. And the NRC said, I think they were laughing at me too, Julie, we can help you with this. So not only did I got 6 of these 550 concrete water tanks, and they helped me with cost share on that. Now I have a dog spa, but if you can't find the dog in the summertime, you just have to go to one of those tanks. And then again, of course, you heard about our cold weather in Texas that we had last February, our polar vortex, some people call it. It was pretty bad, but with the requirements that the NRCS had for me when I put these tanks in, they worked flawlessly. You know, no pipes frozen, nothing. All I had to do was break some ice, and it was about that thick. And my mentors told me, you know, Julie, you need to probably put a few bales of hay in your barn. You never know when you're gonna, you know, need a little insurance policy there. I've had mine in the barn for many years and never had to feed it, but I bought 3 bales of hay and I had to feed them last year, and this year I got 4 in my barn. And of course now, I mean, this is from the girl who never wanted to see a cow again on their property again. I have a bull now too. I had to have a place to work my cows, so I had some pens put up. Now I need a stock trailer. Gosh, I'm successfully marketing my grass-fed, grass-finished steers. They're grading out at Choice, and we even had one this year grade out at Low Prime. So I'm pretty impressed with that. And kind of sum this up, it takes a lot of patience to restore a tall grass prairie. try different approaches to see what works. I've had lots of failures, but they just lead to more successes. Cows, again, were the missing link in my restoration process. And even a small restoration project has a profound effect on the wildlife. Remember, the cows were my problem, and now they're my solution. And I could not do this. I mean, I got a lot of boots on the ground. I got the Able Grasslands as my mentors. I got the NRCS helping me. I got Texas Parks and Wildlife. I now have the Native Prairie Association of Texas. I'm working on a conservation easement. Not only do they work with me, they all talk to each other. We all work together. We're all trying to make this a success. See, now there you can see the old milk shed where those cows were milked. That's now, my husband fixed all that up and we took it away from him. I think he thought it was going to be his man cave. But we turned it into the Prairie classroom, where we now have places for students to come and learn about the prairie ecology that's out there and participate in that. And we also now are having workshops. The NRCS is going to have one at our place back in January. So that is my story, Dairy to Prairie.
For a couple of questions. Do any of you have any questions?
That dairy waste tank that you drain, did you use that stuff for soil building?
Unfortunately. I added too much nitrogen, and we're dealing with that now. With that, yeah. But hey, if somebody my age can do it, anybody can do it.
Okay, thank you so much, Julie.
Yeah.
Let's give her another hand.